I'm Christine Rothdeutsch.
And today we're going to talk about your ideal customer. Before we mix up that discussion, we want to remind you to like, comment, or share this episode. Hearing from you is always great. So, ideal customer, Christine, we've heard about ideal customer, reaching out to the right customer since the year one we've been in business. Sometimes it can be a problem. What's your take on your perfect or ideal customer?
Well, okay, so let me just step back a little bit. So no, I didn't from the day I started my business, did not think about ideal customer. I just felt that I could just tell everybody what I do and they're going to want to work with me. So, yeah, but it took me years to uh when I invested in coaching and learning about business that I started hearing about ideal customer, ideal client, ideal prospect, and I was like, "What?" I'm like, "Really? Not everybody?"
That's a
And
great line. Not what? Not everybody. I love that.
and it's still a struggle all these years later. I don't know about you, but for me, I have to pull myself back sometimes to remind myself not everybody needs what I offer. And an ideal client really comes the one thing that we have to really remember is, are they willing to pay? That, people might need what we have, but it all comes down to, are they willing to pay? Are they willing to pay what you charge? And I see this all too often that people just want to believe everybody is an ideal client. Yeah, it's hard at times. You kinda get lost, in the sea of people and thinking, "Oh, but they need me." Well, yes, and so
Dot dot dot.
yeah.
Well, that's actually very interesting. So number one, I think in addition to need, there's also the idea of an aspirational what need or want, what they want. And that whole compatibility of needing, wanting, and paying do have to mesh. There was someone speaking at a meeting I went to recently. He's a car broker, and people come to him and tell them the kind of car that he wants. And he goes out and he does the search and he does the negotiation with the various car dealers. And here's something he said that relates to what you said. He said, "You tell me they tell me they want a Tesla, but they only have the budget for something else." So we have to explain that to them and we have to talk to them about that. In our case, as entrepreneurs, we do have to establish their seriousness and whether or not they understand the value of our services. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into value and what that value requires in fees. So there's a bit of education and there's a bit of doing a bit of a dance and trying to gather as much information from them about seriousness and what value they put on paying for your service.
Mhm. Well, and even before we get to that point, though, if we back up, I believe in backing things up to figure out how these things work. It comes into how we market ourselves. I
Absolutely.
I've been told to market to your ideal client. It doesn't mean that's the only type of person that you would work with, but you have to pare your messaging down to that ideal person. Otherwise, you're gonna be confusing everyone and the universe, and you'll get nothing, and this there too, when I hear people giving a 30-second introduction, and they wanna throw so many different things into it, I'm left like, "What? What do you do?" Now, again, okay, so I change up my 30-second commercial probably too often myself, and I need to just hone in on one ideal client. Again, it's difficult though. I'm systems, I'm processes, I'm technology, I'm mindset. So how do I hone this in? That's something you and I will be working on, Barbara, I'm sure, at some point. But yeah, it all starts back with how we're marketing ourselves, how we're promoting ourselves, and keeping in mind what the ideal client might look like, but telling ourselves it's okay though, because we will work with other people. Because I even had somebody ask me recently, "Do you only work with women?" I'm like, "Well, no," but that's how I put my message out there. You gotta hone in on something, um, from what I've been
So
told.
what I think is interesting about that, and I totally agree with you that less is more, you give them too much, they become confused. Um, and within a broad span of ideal clients, you may be talking to a women's group, or you may be talking to people over 50, or you may be talking to a group of millennials. And each of those have a sort of a different twist to the need they have for your service. So you might change up your pitch, if you will, dependent on who to whom um, you're speaking. It is about the marketing, and it's certainly about the way you position yourself in your brand. I know that along that line of doing the narrowing, one of the things that often frustrates me is that it does come down to a demographic. And just as I said, you could be talking to a millennial or people over 50, I think any of those could be your ideal client. And the thread that runs through them, what makes them your ideal client, is the pain point they have or the aspiration they have. So, both of us, for example, could be talking to somebody who's struggling to get new clients. But we could also be talking to somebody who wants new clients because they want to scale. And they are at different ends of the spectrum, but their problem or their aspiration is the same. And
Mm.
I think that's something to consider.
Mm.
Problem or aspiration being an important common denominator.
Yeah, I get I'm all about problems and solving problems, but I don't know if I've ever heard anybody put it that way about the having that common thread of aspiration. What is the so boy, when you were saying that, I was thinking, wow, that's deep, and I that's gonna take me some time to figure out, I'm afraid. Uh,
Well, I'm proud to say that I have felt that way somewhat, or as you would say, that idea was rolling around in my head, but I couldn't quite crystallize it. And maybe I was a little afraid to put it out there because it seemed revolutionary.
mm,
Um, but I did hear someone of note who's very experienced in the branding, marketing, and speaking. It was Larry Wingen, as a matter of fact. And I almost jumped through the screen when he said, "It's the problem that, connects people." And I thought, yes, somebody thinks like I do. So think about that when you reflect on that point, and
mm.
take a look at the different clients you have and see if you can find a common denominator of a pain point, problem, or aspiration, despite diversity in their demographic.
Well, thank you for that, Barbara. This has been, worth the time here today. But yes, thank you so much. Yeah, this ideal client stuff. In all the years that I've been working my own business, it changes too. I think you can't just start out and say this is the demographic. It changes. Don't you find that?
I
Even for the
I
work that you do?
I do. And do you ever find that you start working with someone and you realize how much of an alignment, of a connection it is? They, quote, speak your language. They think like you. They have the same kind of values. So it's not only what they want
Mhm.
or need, but it's their style. And it just kind of works with you, and you become so exhilarated because the connection is so perfect. Don't know that that will happen every time, but if and when it does, that's an interesting ideal to set up as your
Mm.
ideal client.
Yeah, you're right, and as you said that, a few past clients have come to mind that actually before we worked together, they decided to come to me because of how I was presenting myself, what they saw me doing out there, both in person or online and everything. And they resonated with what I was saying. They liked how I presented the information. So it started before we worked together. And
That's
that's why I think,
very gratifying.
yeah, and there you go with content, putting stuff out there. It's like, how do people get to understand you? And are they your ideal client? Are you their ideal coach or whatever it is that you're doing? We need the content.
Well, that actually even starts well before you get to that phone call.
Mhm,
That's about the way you brand, right? It's
mhm.
about authentically, a very heavily used word these days, but really expressing, showing, and I always say show is the key word, who you are and what you're about. And just like you said, you resonated with these people and they with you, maybe from the first time you met, before you even got to that discovery call or what have you. And that's because of your branding, not only the content that you put out there, but when you go out to a networking event or you speak an event, you're representing verbally and in plain view what you've put down in writing on your website or in your email or what have you. So it's all in sync for the taking and for them to evaluate, for them to say, I want to work with her. And
Mm.
it is a very cool moment in business when that happens.
Yeah, and these things take time to develop. Yes,
Yep,
they do.
yep.
As with anything we have to do in business, this is one of my soapbox side moments here of yes, these things take time to put into action in your business, but once you do, it's just so rewarding.
Can
Um
you think of any other ways that you would be able to identify an ideal client beyond what I'm going to call the natural magnetism? Can you think of any other way?
Oh, any other way to identify an ideal well, it's something I did, early on when I was with a coach years ago doing, surveys just having a couple questions and just asking people, "Hey, can we just hop on a call? I got a couple questions, and this is something I'm working on at the moment myself." It's, just start asking people questions around what you do, and get their feel, for where they're at. And yeah, that opened up my eyes for so many people. And at that time, I even had a couple of people say, "Oh my goodness, if I was in the market at this time for your help, we'd be working together." But asking questions of people to get them thinking about themselves and who they are and what they need. Yeah, that's, yeah, surveys, definite, tool to use.
That happened when we started working together. I always remember when you said to me, the onboarding, you asked questions that got me thinking
Mhm,
deeply. And they
mhm,
were things that had flitted through my mind, but I'd never really been able to crystallize.
mhm,
And that's exactly what you're talking about there. And
right,
again, that's a very natural way of discovering who's a good connect and who might not be. I suspect too that another way, which is a little more external, not as personal as what you described, might be to look at competitors' websites and
mm,
people who do the same thing you do and see how they're talking to their clients, if it's an interactive site, how their clients respond, because that puts you wise to the dialogue that manifests a good connection. So there's
yes.
definitely, we pointed out some very personal ways, but some research too to
Oh,
do.
yes. Research, that is huge. I'm a huge believer in research, although those are some deep rabbit holes at times that you technically put a time. Okay, so I have a timer here. Put a timer on when you're gonna do some research and stick to it. Otherwise, it gets crazy. And keep your research organized. Otherwise, you're like, "Wait a minute, I found some good information. Where did I put that?" But that's a whole other episode of Soapbox Wisdom,
It's a whole other
about that.
episode.
But yeah, you're right. Look at what competitors are doing, or people, maybe not a direct competitor, but something similar, and see what they're doing. But,
Here's
I
a fun thing too that
Mhm,
somebody told me, and I think you'll like this one. If you do that ideal client, when you go, yes, there's a synchronicity between us. Somehow you get a picture of them from their website or the net and you put it up on a bulletin board or on the wall behind your desk so you're always looking at it. And it will continually remind you of why that client clicked and what makes a good client service provider relationship work. That's kind of a fun little tip that I heard at a meeting I was at not too long ago. And I thought that was intriguing, interesting, and as I said, a little bit fun.
yeah, well, that's a great tip. That's the first time I've heard that one too. It's like, "Oh my god." Well, Barbara, I when you suggested we talk about ideal client, I wasn't quite sure where our conversation was going to go. Was it, something that can help our audience or not? But I truly believe we've gone into some nooks and crannies that even I wasn't even thinking about. Is there anything else that comes up for you?
Just one last point before you take us out, that on the other side of that great picture, that's your ideal client, there are some clients with whom you have very frustrating relationships. There's nothing wrong with them, there's nothing wrong with you. They're just not, might be the click.
Mhm.
So it's probably good to remember some of those frustrations too, because then the pitfalls are top of mind for you. And there's a red flag out there telling you what maybe you should avoid. Not every client is going to work. And to you, where you started, you don't necessarily want everybody. You want the people whom you can best serve.
Absolutely. So, yes, besides thinking of the good, you gotta think of the bad. And again, as we stated in the very beginning of this, what really it all comes down to also is, will people pay you? Will people pay you what you're asking? Because if they're not willing to do that, then they're not your ideal client. So this has been, like I said, a very interesting conversation for me, and I wanna remind our audience to please like, comment, share this episode with everyone that you know, and stay tuned for the next episode of Soapbox Wisdom. Soapbox Wisdom is hosted by brand messaging and storytelling consultant Barbara Menino and business and mindset coach Christine Rothdeutsch. You can find them online at barbaramenino.com